Thank you so much for your comment. And please stick around because I'm going to talk a lot more about the similarities between diversity and chemistry. And I honestly believe that because we have all had a very similar experience with chemistry, whether we liked it or we didn't, because of that experience, when I talk about the table of diversity and DEI, utilizing those same concepts, it makes this work more relatable, it's less threatening, and more people are invited to take part in it, which is what we need so that we can all thrive and be successful. I want to use this video to talk about the individual columns on the table of diversity, and each column represents a different demographic or identity. The first column is race, gender identity, sexual orientation, veteran status. And there's a lot of intentionality in, of course, what goes on the table of diversity. Each column and element has to be researched. There has to be some level of data behind it so that, it reaches that threshold of being reliable. But also the placement is important. So when we think about diversity, we often think about race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And that's why that's the first three columns if you're reading it from left to right on the table of diversity. There was a major update in 2025 that combined race and ethnicity into one column because there were some talks really over the last 10 years about updating the U.S. Census. And so as it stands now, the U.S. Census asks, what's your race? And then there's a separate question that asks, what's your ethnicity? And they were finding that so many people were getting caught up on the second question asking about ethnicity, or there wouldn't even be options for them to choose from that accurately, identified who they were. So they've been really working on this for about a decade to get these questions updated, to get the options expanded. And as I was working with federal agencies, they were close to, really solidifying what that would look like. But the overall consensus is that those two questions are going to combine into one for the 2030 census, and that's reflected here. So that meant there was an open spot on the table of diversity. And so that means that this green column here is a new addition to the 2025 table of diversity. And that represents justice impacted. So it's folks who have been incarcerated, people who are re-entering into society. Perhaps they've been, they're in trial or they're pre-trial, or they have been convicted of something, have a felony or misdemeanor. So that column, there's been a lot of aha moments that have come with this new addition. Because when we talk about expanding our definition of diversity, this one does that, and it does it in such a big way because most DEI conversations, activities, efforts, and initiatives do not include folks who have been justice impacted, especially if we're talking about within the workplace. There's been some community efforts and actions to really shine a spotlight on how people who have been incarcerated and are re-entering society, how they're able to adjust, the opportunities that they have available to them. But that's not been a huge topic of conversation in the workplace. And so that's why it's there, to spark that conversation so that more people are like, I hadn't thought of that. But what is our organization's policy or practice around hiring folks who are re-entering society? And that's what's happened, and I've been super glad to see that. Again, the placement here is very intentional. As I was doing research and talking to experts about, people who have been justice impacted, one thing that I learned is that being incarcerated, folks who are incarcerated have a very similar experience and experience a level of trauma that is similar to people who have been in war. And I thought to myself, my goodness, we need to talk about that. That is something that is so important to how we think about people thriving and surviving and just being at their best, that it just has to be on here. It has to be a topic of conversation. So that's why it's right next to the veteran status, because research shows that there's so many similarities and overlaps in how they experience the things that they are going through, that it just made sense. The next column is about your location. So where do you live and where do you work? And so, are you living in a rural area, in the suburbs? Are you unhoused? Or, do you work remotely, or are you working on site? And one of the great things about the table of diversity is that it's not a either or. It's not binary. It's not either you work on site or you're working remotely. I work maybe 20% of my week remotely and 80% on site, because that's the reality of so many people, is that it's a little bit of everything. And if you're completing this activity, what's your diversity formula, then you'll know that it's select all that apply. It's not a just choose one or choose the one that best describes. It's like choose all of them, because that's how we show up. Next, we have the caregiver status. That's an orange. And, the caregiver status, again, is one of those that kind of represents multiple things. So it could be that you're caring for a kid. You could be your adopted kid, step kid, guardian. But it's also, are you caring for other family members? Are you caring for your parents? Or maybe you're caring for a sibling. Maybe you're not a parent or a caregiver at all. And when you think about what each one of those specific groups of people need, it's different. It's different what a guardian may need versus what a parent who is adopting may need. And so it's so important for us to recognize that just because you are a caregiver, it doesn't mean that your experience is the same as the next caregiver. Next, we have experience or type of experience. So maybe you're an intern, you're entry level, you are experienced, or you're retired. Then we have marital status, age, political beliefs, socioeconomic status, ability or disability, your role within the organization, religion, and then education. And then down here at the bottom, we have the languages. And so there was a new addition to the 2025 version, and that's ASL. And it should have been on the table of diversity a long time ago. One of the things that I do when I'm facilitating trainings or, giving keynote presentations on the table of diversity or intersectionality or diversity compounds or, the science of DEI, we go through an activity utilizing the table of diversity. And as part of the debrief and conversations that follow that activity, I ask folks, like, what's missing? What's not on here that you think should be on here? And I keep a running list of things. So as I'm doing these updates every 2 years, I can rely on the feedback from folks who are in the room. And I am seeing thousands of people a year and getting that feedback. And it wasn't until 2022, 7 years after I created the table of diversity, that someone said ASL needed to be on here. And I was like, oh, you're absolutely right. Like, how did I miss that? And so that was an addition to the 2025 version that absolutely needed to happen. And in doing research and talking with experts, like ASL it's big. A lot of people use ASL to communicate. It's the second most utilized language in the United States. And so it's like, duh, of course it should be on there. And then we have the DISC assessment, and that's a personality assessment. That's what you see there at the bottom in the right-hand corner. And then in the middle is artificial intelligence. And I'm going to do a completely different video on that because there's a lot to unpack when it comes to artificial intelligence. But that's an overview of the table of diversity, each of the columns, each of the groups, each of the identities. One of the things that I think is really important here, it's not about, dividing people into each one of these. Because quite frankly, you're going to select your identity in every single one of these columns. The goal is multifold. It's one, to understand people more fully. I am not just a woman. I am not just Black. I am not just a millennial. I am not just a parent. I'm all of those things. And understanding me and what I go through on a day-to-day basis means understanding all of those individual identities and the intersections of identities. So when we're developing solutions, we have to understand that. But it's also so that we can better connect with one another, right? Like if I am able to connect with other parents that are experiencing life the same way that I am, then we're able to build that really authentic connection where I feel like I belong.